Hi, everybody, and welcome to today. I am working on the concept of why people get so afraid, worried, and avoidant about any kind of spiritual work, intuitive work, deeper diving into oneself. It can get really scary for people, and I want to explore that with you today.
You're listening to the Intuitive Mastery Podcast. Hi, I'm Kate Connolly, and with over 15 years of intuitive healing and teaching experience, I'm here to help you celebrate intuition and value authenticity to create a world where you have the freedom to live your best life. This podcast is here to teach you how to apply the principles of spirituality, healing, and mindset to have true and lasting joy, all from the inside out. This is the Intuitive Mastery Podcast.
Okay, we're talking about the concept of inner work, spiritual work, diving into yourself, all of those things, and why people get so terrified of it and what we can do to overcome it. But basically, when we're looking at doing spiritual work, there are lots of different levels. And I have to admit that for most people, and especially when I first started doing it, I think we get a little bit confused by the glamorization of spiritual work because it's actually really, really hard. I was going to throw a swear word in there, but I'm really glad I didn't. It's it's a process of diving and going within. And when we say that we're doing spiritual work, but we're actually trying to be this kind of, I don't know, yoga wielding glamazon who only smiles and throws positive quotes out there, we're missing the point. We're not actually getting to what needs to happen. And part of our processing, part of our ability to dive and go within and work through our stuff can be absolutely gut-wrenching if we don't have the tools. But also, most importantly, it just becomes this very scary process of moving past our ego. I think Elizabeth April calls them ego deaths, where we get to this place where we have to look at our life and recognize and realize that we are actually responsible for it. And I've been doing this for a very, 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 very long time. I know all the tools, I've done all the things, and I still sometimes struggle with this because I'll have experiences around me where I can easily blame someone else for their bad behavior, but I also have to look at myself and go, okay, so how am I responding? What tone am I setting? What intentions have I placed? What am I going to do to make this better? What am I going to do to make my life the way that I want it to be? And why am I not doing it up until now? And those are the questions that we don't want to look at because they're scary. They make us dive into ourselves, recognize, realize, see, and then change what we don't like. So when we start this process, when we start this concept of spiritual awakening, it typically starts with this concept of, hey, I don't really like my life. There can be a whole bunch of other symptoms out there. I've got lists of symptoms here. This concept of losing sight of who you are. You feel quite lonely and lost in the world. You don't really know where you belong or where you fit in. You feel a bit confused in life in general. You feel like you're in this fright, flight, freeze mode most of the time. So you're in adrenal stress most of the time. You tend to think negatively. You tend to find it hard to shut your mind down. You're constantly in your thinking space. If you struggle with people pleasing and overgiving, if your self-esteem is low, if you have chronic fatigue and deep health issues, if you have anxiety or PTSD, if you're fighting with people a lot, if you use numbing things like drugs, alcohol, screens, shopping, whatever it is to numb yourself, that's a sign. If you feel a bit hopeless, insecure, if you end up with partners who abuse you, if you're struggling to have friends, if you have sabotaging in your relationships, if you isolate yourself from the world, if you're controlling, if you cry a lot, if you're blowing up at others, all of those are signs that it might be a really good thing for you to actually do some inner explorational shadow work. So, shadow work is basically this concept of understanding and recognizing that there might be patterns of behavior, there might be core limiting beliefs, there might be parts of you that are actually playing out in your life and creating loops for different areas of your life. And when that happens, when we have experiences that have impacted who we are, they almost become like veils over our eyes and how we see the world. So, for example, I've had trauma with a previous husband. And what I've had to do with my current husband is very frequently take those veils off, often through pain and some kind of explosion experience or whatever. But I've had to kind of work through my suffering and learn to lift those veils so I can actually start to see a situation for what it is and recognize how much I'm contributing to it. I have to work through some of my own shadows so that I can actually start to go back into a place of trust and love. And it's not always easy to do that. And we don't always allow ourselves to go into that place. Now, this doesn't have to be years and years and years and years of talking about it or years and years and years of feeling depressed. It doesn't have to be that slow, but it does require us to get real. And that process of getting real can create so much fear in somebody because they don't really want to recognize and take responsibility for where we're going wrong. We all have egos, and even very spiritually adept people still have egos, and they can still struggle to move past those places and get into a place of recognition and understanding. So, if you're at the very beginning of your spiritual journey, this is really normal, and there's nothing wrong with you for being in this place. It's hard. But when we can actually start to take a deep breath and go, hey, I'm perfect just the way that I am. I've done everything I can to the best of my abilities up until this point. And now I have another way of dealing with this. Now I can choose to understand and love myself and heal those parts of me that are still struggling so that I can change my life and move forward in a more powerful way. Now, if we decided to go, hey, I've had all of this stuff happen to me, and yes, I've had trauma from my ex-husband, but every time those veils come down with my current husband and I chuck a positive quote at it, it might lose some of its luster a little bit, or I might be able to see a little bit more clearly. But as soon as I've kind of lost the power of that positive quote, veils are straight back in place. So if I want to actually shift them and move into a place of healing, I need to dive into that. I need to go into full acknowledgement of the part of me that dealt with that trauma. I need to fully allow myself to feel it and move it through my body. I need to forgive myself, sometimes the other person, and the situation usually, for having that experience in my life. Then I need to learn how to give myself love, full love for myself, for the person, for the situation. And I need to bring that through myself after expressing everything that I've needed to express so that I can actually start the process of healing. And that does not have to be scary, even though we feel a bit scared at the time. But most of the time, like in my experience, I get embarrassed about getting all emotional in front of other people. And I did a process yesterday, actually, with a friend of mine, a very dear friend. She's a healer as well and a channel as well. And she took me through the process, and I was really reluctant. Totally trustworthy person, totally trusting situation. I was at home, I was safe, and I still had parts of me that were struggling to release. And it's only from her gentle love and encouragement and holding, which not many, like I do for a lot of people and not many people do for me up until now, I actually found it really hard. And so giving myself permission to actually release a lot of that expression and the feeling, it was difficult because I had to move past the ego of, oh my goodness, I'm going to look like a deal here, and move through that into a place of actually, this is how I move past it. I can't move past it without releasing it first. And I'm going to allow myself to kind of process and heal this particular issue so that tomorrow I don't have to consistently have this veil across my face around how I see the world. And we're going to have different parts of our ego that we struggle with. We're going to have parts of us that struggle with the concept of responsibility. Yes, I have a really, destructive relationship and my partner's very abusive. It's all their fault. Well, is it? What part of I played? What part of my lack of boundaries have I displayed? What part of my lack of being able to speak my truth? What part of my allowing someone to treat me like that on a consistent basis without taking action differently have I allowed? What veils, what belief systems, what unconscious energies are sitting in my system that I'm still allowing this to happen? And that's the stuff that we get really scared about, because then we have to recognize A, the reality of our situation, B, responsibility for our part in it, and no, we are never responsible for someone else's behavior. I need to be really clear about that. We are never, ever, ever responsible for someone else's behavior, but we are responsible for our own. We're responsible for our responses, for how we deal with things, for how we show up for people. And if we don't do that in a manner that's in our highest good and the highest possible version of ourselves, we're going to be contributing to the situation. So it sounds like a ridiculous example, but I remember looking at different examples in books and movies where, you have someone having a bit of an ego bash at someone, yelling at them or having a go at them or being really angry or whatever it might be. And the other person, they have the choice. They have the choice to either yell and scream back, or they have the choice to actually say, ow, that was really unnecessary. That hurt. And the first one feeds the argument, and the second one stops and creates a mirror for that first person. Which one is more effective? Because the first one feeds the fire and allows that first person, the perpetrator, if you want to call it that, to buy into this and buy into the argument and buy into the issue. And then the second one is, hang on, no, that's not okay. That hurts. And I can move past my trigger, which is, that's not me. That's not what I did. What are you talking about? How dare you speak to me like that? And all of those very, very normal human responses. I have not nailed this yet. I need to tell you, I'm close, but I absolutely have not nailed it. And then step back, have the ability, have the space, have the discernment, have the detachment to be able to step back and go, hang on, that hurt. Now, the people that we're going to struggle with this the most are our closest people. So even though we theoretically need to treat our closest people the best, we tend to treat our closest people the worst, because we are safe with them, number one, but also they know us so deeply well that they know exactly which words, which weapons, which pain body points, whatever they want to do, whatever triggers they want to create, they can do it because they are your people. And if they choose to use those weapons, that's their choice. How we choose to deal with that then becomes on us. And I'm not saying this is an easy transition. It is absolutely not. But if I was to wake up and go, okay, well, I'm responsible for this. I'm responsible for how things are. And that really hurts me to say that, because I know that someone else is behaving really badly. What am I going to do about it? How do I move through that? How do I make it so that my life becomes the happy, joyous, free place that I want it to be? And this is where spiritual work is really, really powerful, because it's this inner work. When we do it over time, it creates authentic, bone deep change in the world, little by little. It's not a, I'm spiritually awakened and the world changes. That's not how this works. It's a process, it's a journey, it's a commitment to ourselves. And it's a constant, constant commitment over days, weeks, months, years. But it's only when we truly decide to go within and create that commitment to ourselves that we can actually get through these things. So this is where one of the other resistances comes through, and that is our lack of worthiness and our lack of love towards ourselves. We really struggle with this concept of consistently committing to our own path. I've done this multiple times where I've absolutely sabotaged a meditation practice, a yoga practice, a healing practice, whatever it might be. I don't do that anymore, thank goodness. And the more I dive in and the more I deal with things as they come up, the less I carry. So as we move through our lives, every tiny thing that we haven't processed, dealt with, allowed to kind of become conscious of, it actually kind of all builds up in our bodies. It builds up in our energy fields. It builds up in our relationships. It builds up in our physicality. And over time, that can actually make us really sick. It can make our relationships really toxic, and it can make our ability to be happy really hard. So if you're sitting in that place, you might have to consider the possibility perhaps of starting to undo those layers. And what I'm finding is that the more and more and more and more I undo those layers, the less and less and less burden I carry, and the more and more and more freely I walk in the world. So having that as an awareness could be really helpful, but also really bearing in mind that we have parts of us that are going to absolutely sabotage this healing process, and these are all of those unconscious limiting beliefs. Now, we pick these up from our early childhood, from when we were in the womb, and from our multidimensional parts. So other parts of us that are sitting out there in the galaxy, they are holding on to those parts of us that we can't actually allow to live us and give us the life that we want. And those unconscious belief systems are exactly that. So to access them, we need to be open and willing to look at either energy work or long periods of talk therapy, or anyone that's actually intuitive that can work on something a little bit deeper. People who can actually really deal with the energy of situation. You might need to go and see somebody. I deal with this in my intuitive mastery school. You may want to get individual sessions. You may want to just sit in contemplation with meditation. You can do it through automatic writing. But the crux of it is that you have to start looking at the unconscious stuff. You have to start being okay with kind of opening that vault and saying, oh, what's inside? Is this something that I need to be aware of? I'm going to say yes. And is this something I need to work through? Again, I'm going to say yes. Because once you give yourself permission to do that, then everything opens up, and then you have the capacity to heal it. So the healing process in and of itself is actually really quick and really easy if you know what you're doing. A lot of the time, it's around allowing yourself to fully feel the emotions, bring the emotions through your body. There's lots of emotional techniques out there. I have 2 of them alone in my book, The Intuitive Heart Revolution, and you can find them everywhere out there. They're very, very powerful. You can have healing sessions where you allow yourself to bring in acknowledgement, oneness, forgiveness, and love to all those parts of you that have experienced that emotion and that trauma. I have lots and lots of processes on this, either on my socials or in my intuitive mastery school. There's lots and lots of processes out there that you can learn how to move those energies through your body and heal them. And then when you come out the other side, often the behavior will shift naturally. But it's also then really important to get very mindful of what's happening in your world. Okay, I've just cleared this trauma of being a victim to the abuse of my husband. And now what am I going to do moving forward? What is my behavior going to do? What are the tools that I'm going to use in my relationship when I feel hurt or triggered? What is it that I can do to actually create intentions to create a happy, healthy, functioning relationship? Or do I need to get out? Those are the kind of questions that you can start to ask yourself once you've moved through that healing process. Now, it feels long and it feels hard, but let's just say you've been in this abusive relationship for 10 years. And let's say this process alone takes, I'm going to say 6 to 12 months. I don't know. Everyone's different. You go through that process, you come out the other side, and you either have a happy, healthy, functioning, loving, awesome relationship, or you're still stuck in that same abuse cycle. Or number three, you choose to leave. So there are three choices. You go through the process, you have the choices of leaving and staying. If you stay, you're probably going to have a better relationship because that's where your intention and that's what your healing has allowed you to call in. Or you go, actually, this is never going to work for me. I need to jump out. But either way, you're going to be in a better place because you're going to have better boundaries. You're going to feel better about yourself. You're going to feel more healthy. You're going to have better ways of processing. You're going to have more awareness of yourself. You've got more responsibility around how you're showing up in the world. And with great responsibility becomes great freedom. You get freedom from this sense of knowing and being accountable to yourself on an everyday basis because you are no longer being shackled by these unconscious beliefs that don't serve you around either, victimhood or I'm not worthy or I don't love myself or, whatever it might be that's showing up for you, fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, all of those things can create those veils where you can stop yourself from having that sense of love and connection with somebody. You move through them in 12 months, you could be having an infinitely better and different life. If you don't do it, you're going to be in the same place. And that's cool. Like, do what you need to do. Do you the best way that you know how. And this is not a pressure thing by any stretch of the imagination. I've got people who I've been holding space for up to 10 years because they're in and out of a relationship or they're in and out of deciding what's going to be best for them. That's not your fault. You're doing your best. And some people recognize, understand, and shift out of things in 2 months. I understand, I recognize I don't like this. This isn't working for me. I'm out. And then they just leave. And that's okay too. So we all have these senses and these understandings of what our options are, but only if we allow ourselves to dive into the unconsciousness, to dive into those limiting beliefs and what might be holding us back. And then the actual healing and the moving through it, I actually enjoy it. I think it's kind of fun. You can kind of go into all sorts of different energy worlds where you kind of discover and unpack and move through these situations where you can get a greater insight into yourself and you can start to heal really deep parts of you. And then you create new pathways. You're retraining your brain, you're retraining your energy body, you're retraining your entire life to be something that's more aligned to what it is that you actually want. I mean, what could be cooler than that? I mean, I teach this, so of course I think that way, but there's nothing more exciting than that. It's such a worthy path. So it's just important to be really, really kind to yourself when you're terrified of going into it. I know for a lot of people, they're terrified of having accountability and responsibility. They're terrified of going beyond how things mechanically work, right? Well, I said this and you said that. Yes, but what you said was actually extremely hurtful and painful and unnecessary. It's like, well, whatever, it's my truth, right? Or a lot of people say it's the truth. There is no the truth. The truth doesn't exist. It's your perception and my perception. Your perception is your truth. My perception is my truth. And you will never, ever, 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 ever have a situation where every single person in a room has exactly the same perception of a situation that unfolds, because each and every one of you is going to be working through the veils of their own system, their own veils of beliefs and understandings and spiritual consciousness and how the world should work and all the other things that we carry in our minds and our belief systems. They become these incredible veils. And so two people will see the exact same thing and have incredibly different experiences of it because of where they've come from in the world. So the truth doesn't exist. And if anyone ever tries to throw the truth at you, please remind them that this is a perceptual society. Everything in our world is only perception. None of it is real. It's only our own truth and our own perception of our lives, which is what's showing up as our reflection. That's a pretty cool concept. And it's true. Just experiment and see. So we've also got these concepts of goodies and baddies, good people, bad people, enemies, friends. And we're much more likely to try and categorize people and feelings and things so that it can absolutely feel easier for our mind to decipher. That person did a mean thing, they're a mean person, they're going into the naughty pile, I'm not going to have anything to do with them. But what if we were to like dive into that a little bit? What if that person just walked away from, you know, realizing that their child had died? What if that person just walked away and they'd lost their job and therefore are going to lose their home? What if that person had just found out the most devastating news of their entire life, different to the two examples that I gave you, and they needed to then show up in the world? Are you going to begrudge them for having a bad moment? Are you going to begrudge them for not being the perfect person? If you know them well and they're doing this on a regular basis, you have to also ask yourself, what trauma is this person playing out and why? And if that person can start having mindfulness for themselves, hopefully they'll start to go within and start to also ask themselves that question, why am I constantly like this? What is this actually about? Do I want to stay like this for the rest of my life? Now, if these people are perfectly happy being who they are, if they're perfectly happy playing things out the way that they do, if they want to keep the status quo and that doesn't work for your value system in any way, you may need to think and rethink about that relationship for you. But you don't necessarily have to get rid of them either. You can just have them a bit further away. And they're not necessarily needing to be part of that inner circle or a part of your life. So when you have these situations where we dichotomize things, good, bad, evil, joyful, whatever it might be, we are vastly limiting a situation. I think the best question that we can ever ask ourselves is why? Why am I feeling this way? Why is this happening? Why am I going through this? What emotions are coming up for me? Why are those emotions coming up for me? And usually, when we dive through those levels of why, we can actually get into some really beautiful insights into what's actually fueling our behavior and creating those triggers for ourselves. Now, we often don't want to do that because we get a bit blocked in ourselves. So sometimes using a practitioner or doing it in a group is better. But it is actually really, really a beautiful thing. And again, I think if we can move past our ego, it can actually be a very powerful and uplifting and connecting experience. Because don't forget, the more that we can do that with ourselves, the more we can actually start to do that with others and create deeper, loving, more connected relationships as well. So Carl Jung, he once wrote that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And I have seen it. I have seen it in my clinic. I have seen it in my home. I have seen it with my friends. The stories people make up, the avoidance tactics they use, the excuses that come out to avoid looking at themselves is like, I could write a whole book just on that because it is amazing watching people in avoidance and people trying to excuse a situation based on other things, other people, the enemies, the bad things, the bad situations, the bad behaviors. They did this, so I did that, whatever, whatever. And that absolute avoidance at looking at themselves is part of that kind of ego death experience that we need to give ourselves permission to release. We are more ready and willing to hurt other people and go to war with other people than look within ourselves as a source of our own suffering. And I actually remember doing a post on this a few weeks ago. And I don't often get haters, but I got a few haters from that post, which was we need to recognize that, if there's a part of our lives that we don't like, we need to actually be okay to go within and say, hey, I caused this pain. It's a bit ouchy. It's a bit ouchy, but it's true. And even though I didn't do that other person's bad behavior, and even though I absolutely 100% never will and never have deserved it, I still need to find a way to change my own world, because that's actually the most important part. So when we can move past the ego barrier of it's not my fault, I didn't do this, I'm going to blame everybody else. We also have to look at the higher perspective of it's actually consciously not your fault, right? You didn't do this consciously. Nobody does this consciously. Nobody consciously creates, well, 90% of people don't consciously create problems and issues and fractures in relationship and health and other things. We're all showing up and doing our best every single day. So, from the pure spiritual perspective, it isn't your fault. However, it's still okay to say, hey, I know I didn't consciously choose this, but I'm also responsible for making it better. And that's where the responsibility needs to fall on us. I need to choose something different. And I need to work through whatever unconscious blocks I have. All sabotages, in my opinion, are unconscious. I need to work through whatever unconscious blocks I have so that I can actually move through into a state of healing. So, even if we've done spiritual awakening, even if we're been on this path for however long, we will still have an ego death that we need to go through. We'll still have things that we need to face that we don't want to face. We're not going to be perfect, but it will be infinitely less hard than if you're at the beginning of your journey. Having said that, I've also seen some people who, and I think time is speeding up, so people are finding it easier these days. But I'm working with people who had their waking up moment only a couple of years ago, 2, 3, 4 years ago, who are miles ahead of where I was 2, 3, 4 years after my awakening. So it's not necessarily a time thing, it's a dedication thing, it's a connection thing, it's a desire thing. If you have absolute desire to shift your life, you 100% can. You just have to make sure that you go through the steps. Okay, what else is there? So I think when we're looking at going within, ultimately we have to ask ourselves why, and the why has to be the most important part. So it's about placing truth and the desire for freedom above all else. And we're talking about our own inner truth. What is my truth about this situation? What do I need to work through? What do I need to be called out on, torn down, burned, and built back up around? What do I need to understand about myself that I'm destroying in my life so that I can do things differently? And if we give ourselves permission to do that, then we can love unconditionally all those parts of ourselves that haven't allowed whatever it is, joy, happiness, abundance, freedom, happiness in relationships, health, kicking our goals, whatever it might be that we are not achieving in our lives, we can actually start to unconditionally love and heal those parts of us so that we can get out of our own way. We can stop putting up our own hurdles, because the only thing that gets between us and where we want to be is ourselves. And I'm going to say that to most, I know there's obviously going to be some kind of exceptions to the rules. If you're a prisoner of war, if you're stuck in, really abusive situations that you can't find yourself a way out of, a lot of people feel really stuck. And I absolutely 100% feel for you. And I 100% am not suggesting that this is anything that you've caused or created or anything that you have desired. I'm not saying that anybody desires this, nobody. If we could ever choose, we would never choose this, but we always have the power to move through it and find a way forward. Okay, so we can choose to have the challenges in our lives and move forward and create more life and more joy and more abundance and more excitement. Every time we push through a boundary, we open up the possibilities of new. Every time we kind of expand our sense of comfort, because comfort is what keeps us the same. Comfort is what stops us from trying and changing and moving and fixing and creating greatness. And most people are much more comfortable in their discomfort than they are about pushing out into new things. So every time we choose to push out into something new, we are in and of itself going through an awakening, a change, a shift. We're going into our inner body. We're going into our soul work. We're going into a spiritual awakening every single time we try to do something new. So it doesn't matter what you call it. If you choose to step into a different way of being, you are growing. You are stepping into a spiritual awakening, and that's an exciting thing. When you hit a roadblock, you have to realize, hey, it's not impossible. I've just hit a roadblock and I need to heal whatever that roadblock is before I move on. And I'm going to hit another roadblock, and that's cool. I'm going to heal that and I'm going to move on. And that becomes the process. I have my goal, I'm moving towards it. I'm doing what I can in the physical to do it. I'm doing what I can in the energetic world to do it. And I'm healing and working and breaking through all of those barriers so that every time I hit a roadblock, I can smash through it with ease. And that's when we start to really go into what the spiritual people like to call flow. If I'm in flow, everything's just moving and working exactly how I want it to. And if I hit a block, then I know that there's an unconscious belief or something in there that's stopping me. I'm going to heal it. I'm going to go back into flow. So as we start to become more aware, as we start to awaken more, as we start to dive into this more and more and more, and this becomes a way of living, then the worlds are our oysters, people. But we just need to be aware that it's okay to understand and recognize that the beginning is really, really hard. Moving past the ego, moving past the shame, moving past that sense of I need to blame myself for stuff that I don't feel at fault for. The concept of I actually need to go into trauma and pain and drama to heal this. Well, you can either kind of dive into that and understand it, recognize and heal it, or you can continue to play out pain and trauma and all sorts of stuff in your daily life. It's really up to you how you want to do it. Personally, I think it's easier to dive in, move through, come out, and just vibrate at whatever it is that you choose to vibrate at without any blocks in there, because those blocks are going to create those constant sabotages that are stopping you from getting to where you want to be. So the why for me is freedom, joy, love, manifesting my goals with ease, moving into a life where actually everything feels amazing. I'm really grateful for my family, my job, my lifestyle, my children, my health, my world, my home, my holidays. I love every single part of my life, and everything is flowing and joyful and easy. We never get to that place unless we find those things in our spiritual world, our emotional world, our inner world that are blocking that. Food for thought. I hope you found this really, really helpful. If you would like to join my Intuitive Mastery School, I have 3 different levels that can sort across all sorts of economical bundles, time bundles, whatever works for you. I've got 3 different options there. If you'd like to join me on your spiritual journey, we would love, love, love to have you. Just click on the links below, and I will chat to you at the next podcast.